One of the things that we would really like to see is more critical discourse about the parks and the people who lived in them, how they were made during this period. So that's one thing that we would like to do. We would like to be part of the conversation that we hope happens and is happening about what does it really mean to have these big national parks? What does it mean politically to have a tourism industry that works the way it does in Alberta? And what do even ideas about conservation, how did they work then, how do they work now? So we want to be part of that critical discourse that doesn't just celebrate these fun characters and this, Wild West idea. We want to be part of the conversation that says we need to be thoughtful about what went into making the Wild West and what's going into making the New West today. Another thing we want to do is to highlight Tex's contribution to literary culture in Canada and in the United States because, as Andrew said earlier, we have very firm ideas in literary history about what constitutes literature in Canada, and people who wrote for magazines and newspapers don't always get to be part of that understanding of our history. And I think people like Tex, who wrote for money and who wrote for a market, their writing deserves to be understood and seen I think that the things that Tex was thinking about, the ways he was writing about them, deserve to be part of our history. And we should have some critical dialogue about the good and the bad that goes into the stories that he wrote. And that will help us understand ourselves better.
And I think our analysis of his stories helps us to understand certain aspects of the social and cultural constitution or substance of Banff, the national parks, Western Canada, maybe even as a whole in the early 20th century, which in fact were far more complex than the very powerful Stampede, Indian Days myths that we now live with because they're so much in our face. Tex wrote about a world that was radically different from the world presented after the Second World War by these tourist and other mass culture, industrial culture enterprises. And so when we present stories written at that time, we have a responsibility as scholars, I think, also to analyze them as a function of their time and place. And that's something very different from saying, aren't these stories about Banff wonderful? Look what Banff was like in those days. That's interesting, but it's more than just Banff that's at stake here. It's something slightly larger. It has to do with the entire social and cultural makeup of that place at that time. Yeah. And maybe all our images of past places and peoples are too simple. I certainly feel that one of our jobs as scholars is actually to bring out the complexity and the contradictions and the difficulties in historical analysis, not to simply provide a simple story that makes sense. Some of this stuff doesn't make sense. It's just there, and it's messy and it's thick and it doesn't go away unless you forget it. And so bringing it to memory is partly a function of a particular kind of cultural politics also.